Chapter 74 Andrew By far, the most accurate measure of success during research was the on-screen off-screen indicator. The difficulty with playing a character who is supposed to be an expert on the supernatural is that, in the pursuit of research, you often find yourself learning things that your character was already supposed to know. It can be deflating to stumble across an interesting tidbit, a tiny morsel that you believe might unlock clues to the mysteries of the paranormal, only to realize that the entire discovery occurred off-screen. No matter how important the discovery, if it occurred off-screen, it was likely that Carousel did not intend for that line of research to bear much fruit. The role of the researcher in a story is incredibly consistent, and discovering lore that could enable you to destroy evil always follows a pattern. You start with a problem and then seek a solution. You find one, but you don't fully understand it. After initial failures, you reach a better understanding, and then, if you are clever, you can find a way to implement your discovery into a solution that can win the day. Carousel will obtain footage of you all along the way, so if you come across something interesting in a book and the cameras are not rolling, you can almost certainly assume that you have not solved your problem. The books and the stacks within the Witherhold Manor certainly contained lots of information about werewolves. Much of it was redundant, so Riley and I were left searching for errant phrases, small paragraphs that contained information we didn't know among seas of information that we already did. Riley had found a journal that fascinated him and contained enormous troves of information about the history of Witherhold Manor, but the information was, as he claimed, not canon to the storyline itself but rather to something deeper. He believed he had found information about this story from before it was a story, from back when it was real in its own world. I wasn't sure if he was correct about the nature of his discovery, but we stayed off-screen as he read it, so it didn't really matter. It gave me no small amount of pride that I was the first to find something substantial, something that brought us on screen, though I soon wished I hadn't. On screen. "Look here," I said. "You got something?" Riley asked, his voice eager but cracking from hours of disuse. "I believe I do," I replied, flipping open the brittle pages. "This is an oral history from a man named Ephraim Stokes, a jailer in an asylum far to the south. He was charged with the responsibility of feeding a group of ex-soldiers, locked in the deepest, darkest dungeon of that asylum, men afflicted with a curse, men who howled at the full moon." Riley's eyes sparked. "That sounds right up our alley." I nodded, letting the weight of the words settle between us. "Here's what Stokes said," I began, my voice steady. "They be men lost, but only in flesh, for their spirits have long gone from him." Stokes saw more than just beasts. He saw broken men, shattered in ways deeper than scars of flesh. Several of the men, he says, were scarred in the war, not scars of the body, but of the soul. Riley listened on, no doubt curious as to why Carousel saw this information worth broadcasting. "As the curse takes hold," Stokes said, "they find themselves back on the battlefield, haunted by old fears, old wounds. In their desperation to escape, they take refuge in the wolf, surrendering their spirit to it. And to keep from falling apart, they look to the pack leader for something steady, something to hold on to." I paused, the candlelight flickering across Riley's face. "Some, Stokes believed, would never be men again," I read. I let those words hang in the air. First-hand knowledge of having dealt with wolves was useful when most of our research involved legends or second-hand information. "That's the best explanation for why they are so loyal to the pack leader that I've found," Riley said. "Yes, most accounts seem to hand-wave that away, as they can't explain why creatures of human intelligence would resort to an animalistic hierarchy that does not appear to be based on reproduction or territory." We continued to squabble with small comments, hoping to provide Carousel with whatever lines it needed for its movie, but the plot cycle never shifted 1 centimeter. The story wasn't moving forward, which, to my understanding, meant that there was something we were supposed to do or say. Luckily, Riley was adept at figuring out these particular problems, more so than I had seen among the veterans. "It would seem," he said, "that those who have trauma before being cursed have the worst of it." He stared at me with accusatory eyes. It would definitely seem that some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder would exacerbate the curse if this account is to be believed, I said. Well, I hope none of us have any such baggage, he said with a cough. And just like that, the plot cycle started moving forward again, just enough for me to notice, and we were off-screen almost instantly afterward. For a moment, Riley and I just stared at each other, and I was certain he was preparing to mock me. It was suddenly quite clear what Carousel's plans were. And one may end up being more of a liability than we anticipated, I said. Yep, Riley replied. Was he being smug, or was he being so tight-lipped to avoid gloating? I cleared my throat. We would certainly have to plan around whatever it was Carousel was scheming. Tilde. Michael Brooks is not in the forest, the big guy, Antoine mumbled under his breath. I thought that's what he said, at least. Did you say my name? I asked. Antoine turned to me and said, no. I could have sworn he did. He must not have said any of that because I was in the forest. So was he. I was hearing things. He started looking around the forest trail, then turned to me and asked, how far are we? Just a little over half a mile further to go, I said. I knew my way around. A park's map was attached to the red wallpaper in my mind, pinned there with a hunting knife. I could see the map, and I could see us on it. I was the master of navigation. It wasn't the type of map we used back in the army, but I wasn't going to complain. I never complained. Not until lately. A lot of the popular walking trails are up this direction, I said. Try not to look like we're on our way to assassinate somebody. We don't want to scare the shit out of some family on vacation. We'll just tell him we're out on a hunt, the blonde mercenary said. It's true, ain't it? The men laughed. I didn't. Back at Camp Dyer, they told me that if I didn't learn to act, I was never going to level up, but that if I always acted intensely and quietly, I could just be that character, the strong, silent type. It had worked. We had packed light for this mission. This was reconnaissance, but I could tell that the mercenaries were itching for a fight. I was, too. I put off following up with my character's subplot to make sure I was here in case things went wrong. I had time. During daylight hours, the wolves would be at their weakest, and we could end this movie before it started. We could make this a blowout. We did that once with some snakes. Made the whole story about killing metric shit tons of vipers. Best storyline we ever ran. As we walked forward, I kept thinking about something the Nord had said, that we needed to be sure someone was a wolf before we killed them. Because if we didn't confirm they were cursed, they almost certainly wouldn't be. Carousel would make sure of it, and we would lose all moral high ground, making the story impossible to win. However it was that worked. I didn't see how you could possibly know that, but then, I wasn't sure how he knew most of the stuff he claimed to. Film buff sounded like a snub of an archetype. The folks at Camp Dyer managed to get by without film buffs, but now we were supposed to act like he was an expert. I didn't know what to think. Andrew said that we should trust him, that he thinks Riley is so in tune with the game that we can trust him to help us win it. I think he's just obsessed. Spends all his time in the Atlas like it's his best friend. Only talks about the next mission or some other part of the game. I couldn't wait to find out what Logan would have to say about all this. Logan always had good takes on things. He seemed to understand them so quickly. The Logan in the basement was different. He wasn't himself. He was sick. His tongue was tied. All we had to do was rescue him, and I would do that if it cost me my life. All I knew then was that I wanted to see a werewolf in front of me so I could shoot it. It's not often that you can solve a problem with a gun in Carousel. There was always some twist or restriction. It was a drag. But in the storyline, guns were the answer, and I was ready. What good was I if I wasn't good for that? Andrew was really good at research. Even without the Eureka trop, he had an eye for finding important things and dismissing things that weren't. Maybe Savvy really did help with that, and I was just having a tough time noticing. I wasn't sure. Every little piece of information mattered. Even if we weren't going on screen for it, Knowing more about werewolves was like arming ourselves for battle. The more we knew, the fewer assumptions we had to make, the easier improvisation would be. Our fate could be determined by how well we wielded even one fact. It was no surprise that Carousel was going to incorporate Antoine's trauma into the story somehow. I knew it from the moment I learned this character also had a dead brother. It wasn't being cruel. Carousel saw the world in terms of production value. Why have someone pretend to be messed up in the head when you could get the real deal? I was reading through the journal of Amadeus Singh, a pseudonym for a Far Eastern academic who didn't think investigating mythical creatures would help his career, so he used a fake name. The Wolsey family hired him to investigate local werewolves, which were beginning to overwhelm the population. His journal told the story of his discoveries. Sometime before he started documenting things, he concluded that the Wolseys had killed their daughter. He was afraid for his life, but he didn't want to abandon his research. A classic dilemma. There was one problem with this story: the family name and the storyline. The people that had built Witherhold Manor were called the Withers. Thomas and Agnes Withers, to be exact. So why were they called Wolseys in this journal, and why was the manor called Wolsey Manor? Well, it was a secret, so to speak. While we were doing our research, we were found by the final member of our team. That's right, Lila White decided to make an appearance while we were knee-deep in the stacks, investigating lore. "Where have you been?" Andrew asked her as soon as he saw her. "Don't start with me," she said, exhausted. "I had to walk all the way here. I had to hitchhike to town, but nobody was willing to bring me all the way to the manor. They said it was too dangerous or haunted or something." "Well, it makes sense," I said. "Bad luck magnet would make you fail every moxie check." She threw up her arms, clearly tired, and said, "Well, I'm here now." After more discussion, it became clear that she had just arrived in Carousel that morning. It also became clear that she was not playing a character. As a wallflower, she was cast as an extra, a background character with little to no lines. Maybe that was because of Bad Luck Magnet. Maybe that was just her type of casting. I made it here before First Blood. "That's all that matters, right?" she asked. Sure enough. I had never seen her so talkative. Perhaps we had not met under circumstances where the subtleties of her personality were easily seen. "Did you find anything? Is your research at least going well?" she asked. "It's going very well," Andrew said. "I feel confident I know most there is to know about the anatomy of werewolves as well as much of the lore. I question how much more there is to discover, but we have thousands of books to go, and there's no way we're going to get through them in the time we have." Lila looked up at me as if asking what it was I had found. Her pale skin was red and sunburned. Had she lost a grit check against the sun? "I definitely found something, but I'm trying to find a way to go on screen with it," I said. Then I had a thought. "You're a wallflower, right? So you should be able to see the script because of one of your tropes?" "Yes," she said. "I don't see much, though." "That's fine. Can you tell me what you see right now?" "Sure," she said. She closed her eyes and focused. Midday exploration of Carousel River Camp. Research in the stacks. Campers in the distance act suspicious. "And those are the scenes that are ongoing right now?" I asked. She nodded. "Those are the ones my savvy is good enough to see. There might be something else, but I don't know." "So you see the scene where we're here researching, right? Is there anything on it? On that page?" She thought for a moment. "You revealed a scripted subplot about trauma." Andrew completed his character's knowledge tree, which means that he learned everything his character should know going into the story. "That's it. There's nothing else?" I asked. "Anything about something called rolling silver?" A look of surprise came over her face. "Yeah, just for a second when you said it, but then it disappeared again." "Strange," I said. "There's this thing that the author is talking about called rolling silver, which is supposed to be a huge weakness of werewolves, but I can't find a way to make it go on screen. But I've got my theories. We're going to have to do some tests." "What theories?" Andrew asked. I started laughing because what I was about to reveal was, frankly, quite a huge coincidence in my mind at the time. You know how Bad Luck Magnet is supposed to give a boost to all of the user's allies as long as they're alive, basically making them a little bit better at everything they attempt. Yes, Andrew said. That's the primary reason we brought Lila, so she could help us with exploration and give us a good foundation for the rest of the story. I think Bad Luck Magnet is the reason we're doing so well discovering information about werewolves. Heck, once I figure out what rolling silver is, it's supposed to be an incredibly potent weapon against them. But I don't think it just helped us discover werewolves' weaknesses. I think there was a reason that Roxy or whoever sent you guys to die at the werewolves' lair. And what was that? Andrew asked, alarmed. I think there's secret lore here, I said, holding up the journal. I think this journal holds a secret that isn't even part of the storyline itself, something older. Whoa, Lila said, seeing something in her mind's eye. What is it? Andrew asked. Now you're saying it's secret lore? It's weird, she said. It's like a space opened up on the red wallpaper when he said that, but there was nothing there. Andrew and I looked at each other. What exactly is that journal about? Andrew asked. It mixes lore and secret lore, I said. I think this thing goes all the way back to the beginning. I might need your help. The question was, did we want to spend our precious time following this lead or focus on a clean victory? That was probably one of the toughest decisions I had ever been asked to make. We should start trying to figure out what he means by rolling silver, I said. Then, if we have time, we can spare some time to learn the secrets of the universe. I felt we needed to untangle rolling silver from the forbidden secret lore, so I started outlining what we needed to do. If we could incorporate this weakness into the storyline, we might just put the werewolves on the back foot or the back paw, rather. Chapter 75 Riley. Just because Carousel decided to redress me didn't mean I lost access to my luggage tag or to any of the items I'd brought in my hoodie pocket. It just meant I now had to try to find a way to squeeze my headphones out of the narrow breast pocket of my suit jacket. I literally had to disassemble them just to get them out. Luckily, I didn't have to try to get my Walkman out too, that would have been impossible. The pocket was made for glasses or a pen. Cell phones hadn't been invented yet. I only needed my headphones because those would allow me to listen in on whatever scene was on screen using quiet on set. Seeing as this storyline was shaping up to be quite research-heavy in nature, with Andrew, Lila, and me nose-deep in books, I felt the need to multitask and listen in. And it was weird. At first, I heard a lot of breathing. I thought it was just someone who needed to hit the gym more often, but then I realized I was listening to a dog, no, a wolf, running for, like, 30 whole seconds. As I realized that's what I was hearing, I became afraid I was going to hear a scream afterward, but I never did. Instead, the conversation shifted from place to place, focusing on things that were mostly irrelevant to the plot. I heard laughing and splashing. I heard people talking as they walked the trails. Whatever Carousel was planning for all the summertime vacationers in the area, it was sure taking its time setting things up. Meanwhile, I was trying my best to sort through the information I'd found in a nearly 200-year-old journal. As far as I could figure, the information could be divided into 3 different types: stuff that I thought was secret lore, which would not go on screen; stuff that was normal lore, which would go on screen; and finally, detailed paranormal experimentation, which could be either type. I didn't know. If werewolves were allergic to normal silver, rolling silver, whatever that was like kryptonite to them. Just reading the entries got me excited. Amadeus Singh really got into experiment mode in the summer of 1826. June 25, 1826. Experiment 17, Subject DA. Volunteer lycanthrope. Objective: test exposure to rolling silver for transformation, interruption and potential cure. 10 p.m. Exposure begins. Subject seated, restrained. 10 ounces of rolling silver placed within 10 feet and activated. Initial signs of discomfort: shallow breathing, furrowed brow. 10:05 p.m. At 3 feet. Subject exhibits visible distress. sweating profusely, reporting burning sensation internally. Pulse elevated. 10:10 p.m. Early signs of transformation. Clawing at restraints, reddening of irises abruptly cease. Subject begins retching, collapsing against bonds. No observable wolfish traits develop. 10:15 p.m. Consciousness fades briefly. Upon revival, subject is fully human but unresponsive. Skin pale, ashen. Reports hollow heat in chest, unable to rise. Note: the Wolsey family has agreed to additional funding for my tests. Rolling Silver continues to elicit transformative disruption but offers no progress toward reversing affliction. Subject withdrew consent after recovery, citing unbearable torment. Curious, effect persists even at distance. Mechanism remains unexplained. Rolling Silver potency affected by amount and proximity. When I read this on screen, I would have to change Wolsey to Withers if it came up. Their story name. Carousel always liked to complicate things. July 18, 1826. Experiment 19, transformed subject E.J. lycanthrope, non-volunteer. Objective, test exposure to Rolling Silver on a subject already in wolfish form. 11 p.m., transformed subject introduced to containment area. Nominal amount of Rolling Silver activated. No immediate reaction. Subject growls low, pacing. 11:03 p.m., now 3 feet. Subject emits guttural growls, escalating to loud howls. Claws at containment bars in agitation. No visible signs of reversion. 11:07 p.m., amount increased. Howling ceases. Subject collapses into a convulsive state, fur bristling unnaturally. Movement restricted to spasms. Transformation remains intact. 11:10 p.m., subject lies motionless apart from labored breathing. Observed continued wolfish traits with no signs of human emergence. 11:20 p.m., experiment terminated. Subject subdued and restrained. Note: Rolling Silver induces severe distress but fails to initiate reversion from the fully transformed state. Consistent agony observed, mirroring earlier trials. Contradicts findings from pre-transformation exposures. July 22, 1826. Experiment XX, barrier trial with Rolling Silver subject D.A. lycanthrope, non-volunteer. Objective, test efficacy of Rolling Silver through a dense barrier. 11:30 p.m., nominal Rolling Silver activated 10 feet behind a 1-foot thick brick wall which blockades the beast from contact. Transformed subject introduced unrestrained into adjacent chamber. Initial pacing and sniffing observed. 11:35 p.m., at 6 feet. Subject begins growling, scratching at the ground. Agitation builds despite no direct exposure to Rolling Silver. 11:36 p.m., subject stumbles mid-pace, convulsing briefly. Breathing becomes erratic, growling ceases. 11:40 p.m., subject collapses entirely, lying motionless but maintaining wolfish form. Labored breathing observed. 11:45 p.m., experiment concluded. Note: Rolling Silver's effects persist even when entirely obstructed by dense material. Potency is unaffected by physical barriers, suggesting the reaction originates from properties beyond physical exposure. Need airtight apparatus to confirm. Mechanism remains wholly unexplained. Further study is required. Whatever Rolling Silver was, it was a big deal. Honestly, I refuse to believe that any real-life scientist could do such thorough and exhaustive research on a subject without once actually defining it, but for a movie, that was a fairly typical problem to have. We knew that Rolling Silver was a very potent weapon, and now we had to figure out what it was exactly. I had some ideas. Mercury sprang to mind, but I wasn't sure what it meant for Mercury to be activated. I might have to do some experiments of my own. More importantly, we had to bring it into the story. We had to establish it, or else it might not be around for us to use later on. I took off my headphones and hid them behind a stack of books. It was 1986, so they weren't exactly an egregious anachronism, but they did feel out of place in a candlelit library while reading 100-year-old texts. I conferred with Andrew about how we were going to establish Rolling Silver. We asked Lila to wait outside. She was another problem. In order for her to be first blood, we probably had to establish her as a character. She said she would work on it. After a quick conversation, and confirming that nothing important was happening on screen by listening to my headphones for a moment, I knew we were in a prime moment to introduce Rolling Silver to the narrative. All the information related to secret lore would just have to wait. It turned out we were getting pretty good at this game because as soon as we were prepared, Carousel was there, waiting to start filming. On screen. "Have you read anything about something called Rolling Silver?" I asked, holding up the journal and pointing it out to Andrew. He leaned over and squinted at the page. "How in the world are you reading that handwriting?" he asked. "Rolling Silver?" He sat back and thought for a moment. "Perhaps that's an old way of saying Mercury?" I had thought of that, but I wasn't sure, I said. "They did used to call Mercury Quicksilver, didn't they?" "They did. I'm not sure, though," I said. "This is supposed to be really potent stuff. We're talking about every wolf nearby would be doubled over if you had enough of it. If Mercury was as effective against the werewolves as this scientist is claiming Rolling Silver is, then I can't imagine someone in the modern age wouldn't have figured it out already." "It would certainly strain credulity," Andrew said. "Mercury is in every household in thermometers. Though most modern werewolf experts rarely approach the subject from a scientific perspective." "How did he discover it?" "Sheer luck," I said. "He talks about it as if it were something everyone might have access to." I selected a passage from when the scientist first started learning about the effects of Rolling Silver and decided to read/summarize it for the audience. "Alright, here we go, May 24, 1826, I said. "So, this guy has a docile caged werewolf in his lab, like, super tame, been in captivity forever. He leaves the room for a moment, and then he hears violent howling echoed through the walls, followed by the sound of frantic movement. He comes back, and the wolf's going nuts, thrashing and howling like crazy." "Not so tamed then," Andrew said. "Well, wait." His lab assistant was still in the room. "So, they start systematically working through everything that might have changed in those few moments, hoping to figure out what caused the werewolf to go crazy in pain. You following me? Eventually, they figured out the assistant had been handling Rolling Silver, whatever that meant, nearby. He tested it again and said, simply bringing the Rolling Silver into the wolf's proximity triggered agitation and torment. Even though it wasn't near the wolf or touching it, it completely set the thing off. It might be actually mercury, Andrew said. That was a common enough substance for a scientist back then. I shrugged my shoulders. Then, on August 3, 1826, he writes about how he talked to some colleagues, I continued. Apparently, others have had similar findings but haven't been able to study the issue thoroughly because werewolves were harder to find, and next to none of them volunteered for study, and the common decency of hunters to spare a poor wolf's life had gone out of fashion. Carousel, though, was having an epidemic. That would explain why we haven't heard anything about it, Andrew said. Werewolves are rare, far more rare than they were hundreds of years ago, it would seem, or at least far more elusive. Well, yeah, I said. A couple of decades after this guy was working, the study of werewolves as a scientific pursuit pretty much stopped happening. They became myths. All we really have to go on these days was lore and old wives' tales. It's crazy to think they were actually closer to a solution then than we are now. Sounds like we are close, Andrew said. We just have to figure out what they mean when they say rolling silver. That is the million-dollar question, I said. Off screen. Very good, Andrew said, clearing his throat. All right, I said. The next time we're on screen with this, I need to establish how effective it is because it is knocking these werewolves on their butts and preventing them from transforming if they aren't already. So now we look for the word rolling silver with a definition? Andrew asked. Yes, I said. And there's something else here I didn't read because Carousel sent us off screen. I found the last part of the journal entry and read it aloud. Still, questions linger. Why is Carousel afflicted so severely? Why do these modern werewolves act so differently from those I encountered in my youth? And how is this connected to the sudden potency of rolling silver? What are the Wolseys hiding? What happened to young Clara Wolsey? The answers remain elusive, but I am determined to find them before this plague consumes the town. Rolling silver was a new solution, Andrew said. And the werewolves are different than they used to be. Strange. That's what it sounds like. He makes a lot of comments about it, nothing fully descriptive, but little things that make me think something changed about werewolves about 200 years ago. He talks about them like they were a disease, like they're people with an illness that gets worse as the full moon approaches. That is interesting, Andrew said. I can't find any accurate depictions of werewolves from before the year 1813. It's as if an entire field of paranormal investigation appeared overnight for the purpose of the storyline. That's not too unusual, I said. Carousel could probably manufacture books on lore, but trying to separate the stuff for the storyline from stuff that might be real is tough. On screen. We were both taken by surprise to be on screen again and tried to look busy as best we could. I almost got a little greedy and tried to throw in a quick conversation about how potent rolling silver was supposed to be to make sure the audience would hear those words, and Carousel would be forced to go along with them. But then I realized what the scene was about. Lila was bringing us tea. Mr. Kerr said that you would be thirsty by now, she said, walking into the room and delivering the tea. Thank you, Lila, Andrew said. You've been very accommodating. She smiled, did a strange little curtsy, and turned to leave, and we went off screen. Lila had used a bit of simple improvisation to inject herself into the story, and now she was a named character. That was better than just a cameo, which was what I'd been expecting. I suppose that even with Bad Luck Magnet, Carousel wasn't going to deny her name in the credits. After all, what fun is a character with bad luck if they are not on screen? It was funny, when we were discussing our plans for the storyline, we had actually thought of the idea of intentionally infecting Lila with the werewolf curse in hopes that she would transform and, therefore, not be attacked by the other monsters. There was a brief hope that this might extend our use of Bad Luck Magnet, but we came to the conclusion that transforming into a wolf would break the trop's effect. The irony that everyone but her was potentially infected now was not lost on me. I grabbed my headphones from behind the stack of books and began listening in. Somewhere on screen, Kimberly, Antoine, and Michael were discussing a group of cabins at the summer camp they had just hiked to. They were doing their best to lay out some exposition, what had happened there and their strategy for exploring. Something about being able to hear what was going on screen was very satisfying for me and, dare I say, stress-relieving. Using the dailies to get some of the on-screen footage at the end of the day was useful, but hearing it actively as it was happening, even if it was only audio, made me feel more in control. I sat there with a dumb smile on my face, listening. Then I nearly dropped my cup of tea as I heard Kimberly whisper a phrase I didn't expect to hear on screen for years to come. Then over there, she said, that's Dyer's Lodge. That's where the counselors slept. A summer camp, huh? Not just any summer camp, though. It needed a summer camp that was usually west of Carousel. Suddenly, I thought I understood why Carousel put this version of the storyline on a soundstage. It needed to do some rearranging. Talk about a cameo. Chapter 76 Kimberly It amazed me how early exploration quietly became my favorite part of a storyline. It amazed me that I even had a favorite part of a storyline. It wasn't too long ago that I couldn't bear to think about them at all. Exploration was the only time I felt safe. I would usually have to pretend I was having fun. Sometimes, I could actually feel it. Talking to NPCs, finding new locations, the thrill of a discovery that could take the story in a whole new direction, the innocence before the killing starts. I didn't want it to end. But it would. It always did, and in the worst of ways. Carousel had warned me about pigeonholing myself as Antoine's love interest, but because of my tropgaterum, we had to add it to the story. It seemed Carousel was going along with it. As much as I liked exploration, the trip down the forest trail to Carousel River Camp was still tense. It was too early in the party phase for me to worry about getting attacked, but the forest was thick, and I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched from the moment we stepped into it. Ant 1 was on alert. Was that because he was a protector and ready to fight, or was the anxiety of being in a forest getting to him? I didn't know. He swore to my face that he had everything under control, and I wanted to believe him. But I also knew that Ant 1 could keep secrets better than most, even from me. "What do you say we take a dip at the river?" one of the mercenaries said, the blonde one with the long hair tied up in a bun. "I'll allow it," Ant 1 said, "but you have to keep your gear on." The men laughed. They were carrying so much gear that they'd drown if they ended up in the water. I wondered what they were being told in their scripts. If I didn't know better, I'd think they were totally enjoying themselves, enjoying the hunt. Boys being boys. But then again, scripted NPCs were such great actors. Was it because of practice, or were they magically controlled to play their character? I couldn't know. I had seen some NPCs that didn't give great performances. They were either wooden or way extra. Riley said that's just how horror movies were, so it was probably on purpose, but I wasn't sure. "The camp is just up ahead," Michael said as we rounded a long stretch of the trail that almost completely circled a pond. I didn't know what to think about Michael, but now that I saw him in action, I felt I knew him better. He understood the hunt. He understood fighting. It was every other part of Carousel that seemed to drive him crazy. He always looked so frustrated. Lila told me Michael had been tricked into coming to Carousel through a pen pal who had written love letters to him. They said that when he got back stateside from a deployment, he drove straight to Carousel. I couldn't imagine how disappointing that would be. I had not seen the side of Michael that could get tricked like that. He was hiding it. Just like Ant 1 was hiding his pain, Michael was hiding his. Boys will be boys. We walked further along the trail. It was steep, and thick roots grew where the trail had been blazed many years ago. The character I played was getting nervous. She remembered this place. I tried to clear my mind, to feel her heartbeat through mine. I needed to know what she knew, even if all I'd been able to do so far was know what she felt. And what she felt about this place was terror. The script said she was brave, and that was why she decided to return here, but she did not feel brave. I'd have to feel it for her. Just a few hundred feet later, we came across a junction where an old dirt road met the trail. I gasped when I saw what stood beyond that. Camp Dyer. I recognized it right away, even with the wrong name on the arch at the entrance. This was the wrong place. These were the wrong hills, the wrong dirt, the wrong trees. As we entered onto the archway, one of the mercenaries had to cut a lock off the gate and followed the trail toward the camp. I started to see the old familiar buildings. They appeared to have been laid out in the same way they had been in my memory. The only difference was that there was no Lake Dyer, no docks, just a large blue river lazily flowing by. And everything looked decrepit. The buildings were falling apart. The plants had grown and were overtaking everything. We were on screen, so I couldn't discuss this with Ant 1, but I could see he was reacting to it just as I was. Was this Carousel teasing us, or was Camp Dyer here simply because the story called for a summer camp, and this was Carousel's favorite one? Ant 1 turned to me as I stared over the buildings, up at Dyer's lodge, and around to the other cabins. "You all right?" he asked. I hardened my features and put on a brave face. "Of course," I said. "Be brave, Kimberly," I thought to myself. "Then over there," I said, pointing, "that's Dyer's lodge. That's where the counselors slept." "Looks empty," Michael said. "The windows are broken. This place has been vandalized 10 times over," Ant 1 said. "All right, fan out in groups of 2. Don't be too brave. Make sure to call for backup if you see anything, and don't kill some random kids who decided to trespass." "Come on, boss, you take the fun out of everything," one of the mercenaries grumbled. What was it with these guys and their lame jokes in the face of danger? Pairs of 2 meant only one thing, that Ant 1 was ready to go exploring with me. With any luck, we would find something good here. And we did have luck, thanks to Lila bringing Bad Luck Magnet. That poor woman. She wanted so much to be forgiven for what she had done that she was willing to use the trap. I hoped nothing too bad would happen to her. Ant-One looked at me and nodded his head for me to follow. Everyone scattered. Ant-One and I walked around the camp, kicking over piles of leaves, both trying not to talk about the tension between us. We couldn't hold off forever. "That cabin over there is the place we first met," Ant-One said. It was an easy guess. We were close enough to see all the claw marks on the doors and the things that had been stacked up in front of the windows. That had been the place where my character had somehow survived an onslaught that killed my friends. The question was, how was I going to find answers about it without an NPC around to tell me everything or another convenient newspaper article? If we were going to get the information we needed, we would have to give Carousel, and the audience, what they needed. "It's the place where my life changed forever," I said. "You saved me. I'll always be grateful for that." "We'll always have Camp Dyer," Ant-One said with a smirk, eyeing the perimeter, moving forward careful step after careful step. "Oh God, don't say that," I said, laughing. "This isn't a romantic spot." "I'm sorry," Ant-One said, holding back a laugh. "Never thought I would hear you say that," I said. "You rescued me, stole my heart, taught me the life of a hunter, and then abandoned me. This is the only sorry I get?" Ant-One took a deep breath. "I always told you it wasn't going to be forever," he said. "I can't risk getting too close to anyone." His eyes grew distant. The audience would already know what was on his mind. His character's brother, like his real brother, was dead. And like his real brother, he felt responsible. "That is the final lesson you taught me," I said. "Always be the first one to leave. I was young, and you were everything." "Kimberly," he said. I turned away, doing my best to force out tears so that I could hold them back to look tough. After a moment of me turning away and him staring after me longingly, I said, "Do you remember that Italian place where they played poker in the basement? The one we went to when we were staking out the werewolf and the Pine Barrens?" I turned to look at him. "Best pasta I ever had," Ant-One said. "What was it, Gino's?" I asked. "I don't even think they were a real restaurant. I think they were just a cover for illegal gambling." "Oh yeah, that place was mobbed up," he said, 100%. We laughed and smiled at each other, but of course, the laughter couldn't last. "We'll always have Gino's," I said. "This place belongs to the wolves." That was it. No more fluttering eyelashes. No more thin smiles. It was back to business. I walked up ahead toward the cabin, and he followed. We sorted through the wreckage on screen the entire time. Michael must not have had much luck because he hadn't stolen the audience's attention even once. "I just don't understand it," I said. "If the werewolves wanted me, they could have busted this door down. Heck, they could have gone through the wall. This isn't a real log cabin, these boards are thinner than they look." "I was distracting them," Ant-One said. "They didn't burst through because they smelled me in the wind, and they didn't want to get caught surprised." That didn't sound right. As I looked at the door and my character's feeble attempts to support it by putting a bunk bed up against it, it just made no sense. Looking at the claw marks on the door, their claws went right through the press board like it was butter, and yet, from what I understood, I had held out inside this cabin for 30 minutes before Ant-One's character cleared the wolves. We kept searching, turning things over, looking for clues. That's how exploration went. Most of it didn't show up in the final cut, but tossing couch cushions and opening every drawer and closet was how you found important things. I was just about to give up when I looked out the window and saw a tree with a single set of claw marks. They were old, probably from the date of my attack. Above the marks was a hole, the kind that a small animal might call home, except this one was perfect and round. Below those claw marks were carvings. At first, I didn't understand what the letters meant until I realized they were the initials of all the friends I lost. I had put those marks there, or at least my character had, I had to assume, as the sole survivor. Now, we were onto something. I slowly walked out to the tree, trying to project uncertainty and hesitation, not because my character didn't know what was there, but because I was afraid to look inside the hole. It was a subtle performance. The inside of the hole was dark, almost too dark for real life. Still, I knew how storylines worked, and I knew there would be something important inside. Bravely, I reached into the darkness. Something scuffled against my hand. I let out a small scream as a bird flew out of the hole. An owl, from what I could tell. Antoine, behind me, started to laugh. "Let me help you out there," he said. He unclipped a flashlight from his belt and shined it inside the hole. There was a bird's nest in there, for sure, but there was something else, too, a square bag. It was made of leather and had a zipper. I grabbed it and retrieved it from the hole. It was worse for wear, but it looked like nothing had gotten inside of it. I looked around and saw the nearest picnic table. I set the bag down on the table and unzipped it. The first thing I found was an old Polaroid-style camera. The name Thomas L. was written on the side in marker. Thomas was one of the victims of the attack. He was one of my friends. I gently moved my fingers over the camera as if remembering something, and sure enough, I could feel my character mourning someone. Not Thomas, but someone similar. That old, familiar pang in my heart was returning. I set the camera down and looked deeper into the bag, where I found a large stack of Polaroids. The pictures were of me and my character's friends. I had no idea how they had gotten my image. Carousel often imitated our voices or handwriting, but to see myself smiling back with my arms spread around strangers was off-putting. I couldn't hide it from my face, so I tried to make it look like I was having a difficult time reliving old memories. The pictures were innocent, teenagers having fun. I even looked younger in the photos. Antoine watched over my shoulder as I shuffled through them. I flipped through the first couple, which were of me and my friends camping and hiking. I found a picture of Sarah and stopped. I could feel my character reacting to the photo, so I tried my best to mimic those feelings: confusion, longing, and dread. Emotions I felt with each and every picture. But when I looked at Sarah's, it was mostly confusion. "Is that the one you saw, the one that is still alive?" Antoine asked. I nodded my head. She was a camp counselor back when we went here as preteens. After the camp closed down, she invited us out here when we were all adults. Well, we were 18, so we thought we were adults. But now it feels like we were still just kids. He furrowed his brow. "Whenever I find a victim of a werewolf, I always pepper their wounds with silver shavings to stop them from turning. I'm not sure how your friend managed to shift anyway. I must have missed her." "You must have," I said. But I kept flipping through the photos, because we were still on screen, which told me there was more information in them. And then I figured out what it was. I flipped to a photo and saw that both Sarah and I were in it, although we were not standing next to each other. "Does it look like she's staring at me?" I asked. "Kind of," Antoine said. I flipped through more photos until I found another one where she was in the photo with me. Yet again, while I was hanging from a low tree branch like a golf ball, she was in the distance staring at me. Another picture, my arms were around Thomas. He had apparently stuck the camera on a timer or something. In the background, nearly out of the shot, was Sarah, staring at me. A shot of us in the abandoned cabins, partying. John's older brother had bought him beer for the trip. We were all posing for a picture, looking at the camera, except for Sarah, who was looking at me. "I never noticed this before," I said. Antoine didn't know what to say. He just stared at me with his best, "Things are starting to get strange" look, and I could almost feel the tension in the moment. We didn't know what to say. "Did you find anything?" a voice called out from back toward Camp Dyer. Suddenly, the tension was gone, and we looked over to see that the blonde mercenary had separated from his buddy and was watching us from a distance. "Nothing," Antoine called back to him. He looked at me as I put the camera and pictures back inside the bag and grabbed it. It was time to go. We waited at the gates for all of the groups to return. "Did anyone find any signs of squatting or anyone living here at all?" Antoine asked the group as soon as everyone had returned. Everyone shook their heads or answered, "No." "That's great," Antoine said. We've narrowed things down considerably. There are only a few more locations that we need to check. And one could always see the bright side. It was one of my favorite things about him. We found the trail that would lead back toward Witherhold Manor and traveled down it for some time, both on and off screen. After we had walked for 30 minutes, we suddenly went on screen, and I heard all of the mercenaries stowing their weapons as best as possible. I tried to look around to see what had happened. There were no werewolves from what I could see, but up ahead was a line of 6 hikers in brightly colored clothing. "Act normal, people," Angmon said. Then, after a pause, he added, "On second thought, act better than normal." The guys snickered. They laughed at all his jokes. We continued working down the path as the hikers approached us. Everything should have gone just fine, though I noticed that they were staring at us with well-warranted concern. Except for one of them. He was grinning from ear to ear. When they got close, that guy, a very tall hiker with a pointy chin, said, "You can never be too safe out here in the woods, huh?" He laughed like he had made a great joke. Seeing a bunch of heavily armed military men in the middle of a hiking trail would be pretty concerning, but this guy thought it was funny. The hiker behind him, a woman, tugged at his shirt as if begging him not to engage. The blonde mercenary decided to respond. He said, "I don't know if we're overdressed or if you guys are underdressed." Most of the hikers were very wary of us, but the tall, pointy-chinned one laughed and said, "Well, maybe you guys are the underdressed ones." "I sure hope not," the blonde mercenary said. I really needed to ask him what his name was. It was very strange to have an NPC who wasn't named be this vocal. He was just called Mercenary. "Let's move ahead," Angmon said. "Pick up the pace." We started walking forward, even faster than we had been, and the hikers looked relieved. The big, tall hiker, who was supposed to just be an NPC, didn't have much moxie, just 1 point. He turned and watched us go, calling after us, "Is there something you know that we don't?" with a grin. No one answered him. Often, I would get jealous of the tropes my teammates had. They could do some truly incredible things. Riley could know whatever tropes the bad guys had. And one could basically be superhuman. Dinah could sneak around the storyline without ever being seen. Anna was guaranteed to be the last one to die. I was a social butterfly, and in a lot of storylines, you didn't really need a social butterfly. But in this storyline, I was glad to have my tropes because one of them, social awareness, had just given me a very important insight. It could tell me information about relationships between different characters. Most of the time, you could figure that out by talking to people. I still like to keep it for moments like this. Whenever the pointy-chinned hiker and the blonde-haired mercenary talked to each other, I learned something that sent chills down my spine. Those two knew each other. More than that, if I wasn't mistaken, those two men were best friends. Chapter 77 Riley Even with my life on the line, I couldn't stay in that little room filled with books forever. I had to get out and stretch my legs. If there were some narrative thread that required me to be around, it almost certainly wouldn't reach me if I was locked away behind a hidden bookcase. Truth be told, I wasn't so certain that my character was innate to the story. I might not even really have my own subplots the way that Kimberly and Antoine certainly did. I had checked the little film canisters I had been given for clues and came up empty. That's what it meant to be a film buff, though. I was a meta character, which meant that I was forever a side dish, never the entree. But supposedly, in this story, anyone could be the main character. So, who knew? At the point that I finally found my way down the stairs into the basement to get another look at the caverns beneath the manor, in case they ever came into play, I was confident that I was not going to be central. After all, most of the research I had done seemed to revolve around secret lore or otherwise hidden history, which was not going to come up unless we found the trigger. And in truth, even if we did, it might be better for us not to pull it. The only storyline we had done with secret lore had been butchered by it, and we really needed this storyline to go off without a hitch, and to score high points. I made my way down to the dank caverns beneath the manor with nothing but a lantern and a small pea shooter I had picked up. There was really no use in me having a big gun when I didn't have a big metal stat to go with it. Sure, I could hit anything I aimed at because of my high hustle, but the damage was going to be pretty similar no matter what gun I used. Carousel always had its tricks to make sure that you played your role and lived with your choices, including your choice of where to apply your stat tickets. The smell hit me again before I could even see Logan and Avery in their cages. As I walked into the clearing where they lay in their cots behind iron bars, I realized that I was not the only person there. Egan Kirst himself sat in a chair next to a table in the room. He sat, and he stared at his son. We were off-screen. I wondered if he was just waiting for a player to show up and run through a dialogue tree or something, or if perhaps he was here of his own volition, for his own purposes. He wouldn't tell me, even if I asked. Whatever the case, as soon as I made it a few steps into the room, I went on screen. So, we were going to have our conversation, whatever it may be, in character. Truthfully, his character was a glorified plot device, so I didn't expect him to know a whole lot. He had largely served his purpose, and as far as I knew, the only thing left for him to do was buy stuff if we asked him to. We had already run through a list of things that we wanted, things like grenades with bits of silver in them, or at least the supplies to make them. We wanted tranquilizer darts and everything we might need to set up traps. His servant, the butler, whose name I constantly forgot, was able to supply us with those things within a day, maybe less. I hope your research into the history of this manor has been fruitful, Kirst said with a stern but melancholy tone. Surprisingly so, I said. I think we may have rediscovered a powerful weapon against werewolves. Kirst nodded but did not look excited. How long until it is operational? We're putting all of our resources into it right now, I said. Then, on a whim, I asked, have you, by any chance, heard of the term rolling silver? Kirst thought for a moment and then shook his head. I'm afraid I haven't. Somewhere, dice had just rolled, and I came up short. Supposedly, it has a powerful impact on any werewolf nearby. There's a bit of a language barrier between us and the author of the text I'm reading, but once we overcome that, we should be able to have quite an effective weapon at our disposal. Wonderful, Kirst said. The man was going through some depression. It was as if the performance he had put on for us had drained him, and now all that was left was for him to wait. In your research, did you learn anything about this manor or the people that owned it? I asked. He took a deep breath. The Withers family, Kirst said, died out just over 100 years ago. The house has been abandoned since until the town purchased it. I bought it directly from them. Supposedly, Witherhold Manor was plagued by werewolves for many, many years, and it is the setting for all sorts of campfire tales. His face was doing the acting. His heart wasn't in it. I'm actually interested in one of those tales, I said. There's an inscription on the fountain out front. It sounds like an epitaph for a child, a young woman or girl. Can you tell me anything about that? I was really pushing it. I didn't know how much footage Carousel had of the fountain out front or of me reading it, but I felt it only logical that I would have this knowledge after snooping around the place long enough. Kirst must have sensed that I was pushing boundaries because he gave me a look that didn't belong to his character. A look that told me to be careful. Rumors only, he said. The young Clara Withers. A nursery rhyme. I barely remember it. I thought it was inconsequential, but it was in the information packet that I managed to acquire from various oral historians. I had no idea it might be useful. But then, I am dabbling in a field far out of my expertise. Clara Withers. Before Carousel, her name had been Clara Wolsey. I understood why Carousel had swapped it out. The Wolsey Manor didn't have the same spooky vibes. Carousel had done the same thing to the halls and probably the Geiss. A nursery rhyme? I asked. Do you happen to remember it or still have the information on you? No need for that, Kirst said. The poem is written on the back of the painting in the small dining room we eat in. You can go see it for yourself. I will, I said. I kept my eyes on Logan and Avery, who were seemingly wasting away in their cages for reasons that hadn't been established in the lore. Newly transformed werewolves were often quite energetic and erratic. Are these two sedated? I asked. No, Kirst said. Though most of the tunnels are collapsed now, they were originally dug for the safety of the Withers family. They lined the walls with silver powder. Imagine that. Of course they did, I said. Werewolves are nose blind to silver. That is what I understand, he said. It was strange. You would think it would be the other way around, that werewolves would be intimately aware of any silver nearby. But that wasn't the case when it came to their sense of smell. So he kept his kid and his kid's girlfriend down here to keep them safe from the wolves, or to weaken them in case the worst scenario occurred. Either way, Kirst was shaping up to be a largely pragmatic man by some definition. Not long after we got to that point in the conversation, we went off-screen. I decided to do a quick walk around the remaining tunnels. Kirst was right. Most of them had caved in, and those that didn't went in loops or led to dead ends or safe rooms. I did learn an important lesson. Always explore the tunnels. Actually, no. Most of the time, tunnels are dangerous. Never explore strange tunnels. Except when you are fairly certain you will be safe. When I was searching an empty stone room at the end of a long tunnel, I found something. I had gone on screen off and on long enough to establish I was snooping around. That told me there might be something down here. I had my gun out, ready to bop a werewolf, but I didn't find one. Instead, I found a place where a wall was crumbling. On screen. Not just silver powder, I said. Where the wall had fallen, several different items had been sealed in the wall. Silver platters, cups, and forks all closed up to keep the werewolves at bay. Talk about loot. Those trinkets weren't what concerned me. It was the item in the mess that had a trap attached that I cared about. I reached down into the pile of stone, mortar, and silver works and pulled out a large pure silver serving spoon. The trap was called Selective Sharpness, and it had a remarkable effect. It prevented users from cutting themselves when wielding a bladed weapon and helped them perceive sharp objects on the red wallpaper. And it was attached to a large, heavy spoon. I stared at it for too long and remembered I was on screen. What in the world? I whispered to myself. I stared along the tunnels and saw that the walls were all lined with the same stone as the fallen wall. Had they covered the whole place with silverware and goblets? Just to hide their scent? I smacked the spoon against my hand a few times to show its weight and possibly justify taking it out of the basement. After I rounded the first corner, I was off screen. On my way back out, Kirst was still there, watching his son, or at least watching Logan, who was pretending to be his son. Since we were off screen, I decided to ask him a question just because it couldn't hurt. Are you meta-aware? I asked. Dr. Halley had been, though I didn't know if he was able to talk to me because we were off screen or because we were both officially dead in the storyline we met. Whatever the case, Kirst shot me a glance like he was not going to put up with my nonsense but otherwise didn't respond. I'd say he was meta-aware. If he weren't, he would have responded in character. From my conversation with Kirst, I learned some important things. I learned that the ill-fated daughter of the clan who built this manor was indeed part of the story and not just part of secret lore. I hated that I had to untangle things like that. It was strange to think that before we discovered secret lore, the information that didn't show up on screen would have been dismissed as fictional filler. Now, we knew the truth, but that didn't do us much good until we could sort it out. My next stop was the dining room, where we had been tricked and gassed. That was where the painting of young Clara Withers was. When I burst through the door, I was surprised to find that she had an admirer who just happened to look a lot like her. We were off screen. I didn't even want to talk about the painting first. I had another pressing question. What did you find in the tree? I asked as soon as I recognized her. She had the answer slung over her shoulder. It was a camera bag or something similar, old leather, worn. Is that it? I asked before she had a chance to answer my first question. This is it, she said. Wait, so you heard that entire conversation? I heard the whole thing, I said. It was my first time using quiet on set, And while the drop didn't work super well for anything that didn't involve my fellow players, it provided very clear and easy to understand audio from when my teammates were on screen. She took the bag, set it on the table, and started opening it up. Inside was a camera and pictures. "That's what I thought you guys were talking about," I said. "So this Sarah woman. She was staring at you?" Kimberly took the pictures and showed them to me one at a time. This woman, Sarah, seemed to have an obsession with Kimberly, even back in her teenage years. At the moment, Kimberly looked like she was about to say something, and I'm sure she was, because before she could, we went on screen. Carousel wanted to keep us on our toes. Kimberly was pretty good on her toes. I thumbed through the pictures and said, "So, you're thinking that this woman might have been a werewolf already when you were attacked? Am I overreacting?" She asked. "Isn't it a huge coincidence that this person just happened to survive a werewolf attack? And in these pictures, she looks like she is very interested. And not in a friendly way." I thumbed through the pictures again. It was my job to push back on Kimberly's theory so that she could fight for it in front of the audience. "I don't know. I think maybe she has a crush. Did you think of that?" I asked. "Maybe. I just have this feeling," Kimberly said, "that maybe there was a reason I survived. If she was a werewolf, maybe that's the reason. Maybe she didn't want me killed." "Come on, Kimberly. I know your story. You think I didn't come across it in my research for my documentary? If a werewolf was interested in you romantically, the first thing she'd want to do is kill you. She'd eat your heart and liver and cross her claws that you would come back to life and roam the wilderness forever with her." "I know how it sounds," she said, "but I can't think of any reason that they would have spared me." There was a moment of silence as I pretended to perceive the desperation in Kimberly's voice, and Kimberly became withdrawn and thoughtful. "Well, I can think of another reason," I said, pointing to the painting on the wall. "Have you noticed that you happen to be the spitting image of the ill-fated Clara Withers?" She looked back at the painting. "I did notice," Kimberly said. "How does that fit into this? Do you think the werewolf knew this woman, whoever she was? They do live a long time." "I don't know," I said. "My grandma always believed that people had lived lives before their current lives, reincarnation, something like that. But then my grandma was also very suspicious of squirrels, so take that with a grain of salt." I couldn't waste a scene where we were on screen, so I moved toward the painting and grabbed it. It was larger than the original omen had been, but it was still small enough for me to handle with one hand. I held it out in front of me and then looked from the painting to Kimberly and back to the painting. "I don't know. Maybe Grandma was onto something," I said. "Then again, all blondes do look a little alike." "Hush," Kimberly said. She grabbed the painting from me. "Look at this." She turned the painting around and set it down on the table, picture side down. As promised, there was a cross-stitched piece of fabric attached to the back of the painting with a simple nursery rhyme on it. "This is what I had come in here to check," I said. "Curse said it was related to the woman who lived here around the time that the werewolf legend started. Clara, where did you go? Mother's cure was far too slow. Golden hair and silver bright, now, a waltz that haunts the night. Howls at dusk, her eyes aglow, if she is lost, no one knows. Was the cure she got too late, or was it meant to seal her fate?" Beneath the rhyme was another line, "To my dear cousin Clara, wherever you may be. May you find peace in the beyond, if indeed you are truly gone. Agatha Withers, May 1, 1866. Tilda." Kimberly and I stared at each other. "Do you think Clara may still be alive?" she asked. "Isn't that what this rhyme is saying?" I shrugged my shoulders. "It certainly would throw a wrench into my reincarnation theory," I said. There was a pause as we stared at the nursery rhyme. Off-screen. Finally. We hadn't had time to plan anything out for that scene, and I had to be careful about what I said because I didn't want to reveal secret lore and mess up everything accidentally. Kimberly stared down at the nursery rhyme. 1866, she said. "Isn't that a little late?" "It sure is," I said. "It's about 50 years after Clara passed, or disappeared, if you believe that. Maybe they knew each other as girls, Agatha and Clara, Kimberly suggested. Or maybe Agatha wanted to make a quick buck by hyping the family legend. That would be about the time that the Withers family ran out of luck financially. Kimberly thought for a moment. Haven't you and Andrew been researching the manor? Do you know anything about Clara or the legend? I actually laughed. Not only do I know the legend, I said, I know some of what actually happened. What do you mean, what actually happened? She asked. Secret lore, or maybe a hidden subplot, or something, I said. I'm pretty sure this story has secret lore anyway. At the very least, there's an underlying truth to be revealed. I don't know how to trigger the cutscene or whatever it is, but I'm fairly certain I've learned stuff about it. So, what did actually happen? She asked. I don't know exactly, I said, but I do know a lot. Come with me. I'll show you the journal. Chapter 78 Riley somehow, we managed to squeeze all of us into that small hidden room behind the bookcase. We only had 2 chairs, so most everyone was left to cram amongst the stacks and hope there wasn't an avalanche of books anytime soon. We had 2 items on the agenda. First, we needed to decide whether we were going to dig further into a possible hidden subplot dealing with the history of the werewolf curse, even if we might accidentally hit secret lore and ruin the storyline. Second, we needed to get our plan together for First Blood because it was upon us. So, in the story we're actually in, the woman in the painting is named Clara Withers, and she died mysteriously, Ant-Man said. Do we know how that affects the story? Nope, I replied. I don't think it has to affect this story at all. Every single bit of lore we've uncovered about the history of the werewolf curse has been through sheer effort. Carousel doesn't seem to be pulling us in that direction. It is mostly concerned about us killing the pack leader. For a moment, we were all silent, as if waiting for the books to start speaking to us. Well, we need some of it to get a complete story, Andrew said. The question of the werewolf curse and its origins has been brought up to some extent, especially the changes that the curse has gone through. It's at least been established that our werewolves here in Carousel are different than the werewolves around the world. It felt like we'd had this same conversation over and over, just with different arrangements of the words, as we all grasped it in our own time. As best we could tell, delving into the history of the curse was optional. And, of course, trying to pursue secret lore was extra optional. What does your guy say about the death of Clara? Kimberly asked me. She was very interested in Clara Wolsey, or, as Carousel had renamed her, Clara Withers. Amadeus Singh started hearing some legends about this daughter the family had some 10-15 years before he got there. From the legends, it sounded like she'd been killed by a curse, and he tried to explain that to her mother and father. They got very upset and told him he was supposed to be studying the werewolf epidemic, not their daughter. He concludes, at least at the point I've read to so far in the journal, that Clara got the werewolf curse, and her parents killed her for it. And he believes that's why the curse changed, but good luck trying to understand his logic. The journal I had been reading was a nightmare to pick through, but I found it engaging. Unfortunately, we were under a time constraint. All right, Ant-Man said, standing up. At the end of the day, we're either going to pursue this, or we aren't. I've got nothing on it as far as any of my background stuff goes. My character's father's journal doesn't have anything on it, from what I can tell, so if you want to pursue this older lore, I don't know if I can help. Ant-Man's character had inherited his father's monster hunting journal, which contained news articles and occasional bits of lore about various beasts, including werewolves. He was taking his time going through it as we were having our discussion. I have to agree, Andrew said. The background reports I have were entirely from a scientific point of view, which is increasingly becoming less and less useful in this story. Does anyone else have anything about the older lore or the werewolf curse? Ant-Man asked. He looked around the room at each of us, even though it took a little bit of repositioning because Lila was under a table, and Michael had somehow wiggled his way in between 2 large stacks of books and had basically disappeared behind them. Lila, anything? Ant-Man asked. Nothing, she said. Nothing I've tried has worked. Nobody would talk to me. The script is almost blank. I don't know anything. Bad Luck Magnet seemed to have a much more profound effect on gameplay than we had ever realized. Perhaps it was just because she was a wallflower, but every attempt she had made to learn anything using Savvy or Moxie failed. Any attempt at exploration she had tried failed. I could see that she was upset about it. She really wanted to be able to help. From what I could tell, in a way, she had helped. The rest of us had so much luck with exploration that we were digging up secret lore by accident. Bad Luck Magnet was a powerful trap. We understood these werewolves very well. We were on fire. How about you, Michael? Ant-Man asked. Anything? Michael didn't say anything at first but then said, nothing. I thought it was weird. If anyone was going to have good lore about the history of Witherhold Manor, it should be Michael's character, whose family had lived in the area for multiple generations. See? Ant-Man said. I just don't think we have a lot to go off here. We have to focus on the fight that is coming. Even if we miss a few points for not getting the secret of the curse, that's all right. Survival is too important. I have an idea, Kimberly said. I can use convenient backstory to say that I'm having visions, or maybe I had a dream about Clara. That should steer the story, right? Kimberly was adamant. She was on a quest for answers more than usual. Ant-Man looked at her, and she looked him right back in the eye, and they had an unspoken conversation. Then he turned to me. Do you think that'll work? He asked. I shrugged my shoulders. In a normal story, I would say to go for it. We know that this is a supernatural story. We know that psychic power works here. And we know that there is a strange link between Kimberly and this old dead chick. Is this a normal story? Ant-Man asked. I wasn't sure. There's clearly secret lore going on here, and we don't know how that will affect things. It seems that every time we dig for the truth of the storyline, we dig a little too far and end up with more than we asked for. I'm having a tough time sorting through the information in this old guy's journal because half of it isn't canon to the storyline, it's canon to the reality of where this story is from. If we pursue the lore, we may end up triggering secret lore, and that's great, except that could make things way harder. I wanted to trigger secret lore. We needed to, for some reason that had yet to be revealed, but we didn't know enough about it to know what would be safe. Ant-Man nodded. So maybe we should come back, do the base storyline, and then get the secret lore, he suggested. I threw up my hands. I didn't know. It's a novel problem, Andrew said. I don't know exactly what you experienced when you triggered secret lore before, but I know that if we accidentally reveal secret lore on screen, we'll be sent off screen, and that could have immense consequences at the wrong moment. He had a point. If I didn't successfully sort out what was true and what was secretly true, we could end up ruining the story, and that could have all kinds of consequences. I think I speak for the rest of us when I say we should just steer clear of digging into the lore on this one, Ant-Man said, looking at Kimberly. Kimberly did not look pleased. What if more of the story reveals that I am the reincarnation of Clara? Or maybe a distant relative? Do we pull that thread then? She asked. I was starting to wonder if I should have mentioned the possibility of secret lore or hidden subplots. The trap of a main character being a reincarnated historical figure is an old and predictable one. Kimberly looked too much like the woman in the painting for it all to mean nothing. The fact is, I said, our win condition is beating the clock. We have to kill the pack leader before the last full moon of the cycle. If we had a different win condition, maybe the backstory would be more important. Agreed, Ant-Man said. I didn't know why he was on this side of things, but I had to suspect it was because his character had nothing to do with this side plot, and he didn't want to emphasize a part of the story that he couldn't help with. But I was just guessing. Maybe he liked the clarity of a simple game of kill the werewolf. I couldn't know. Well, that leads us to our next problem, I said. First Blood is coming up, and we need to be ready. It took us a while to actually change over to the topic, as no matter what logic told us, we really wanted to get to the bottom of the werewolf curse lore. I certainly did, even if I knew the risks. And Kimberly never backed down. It was like she took it personally that we were suggesting we might have to abandon that subplot for the sake of survival. She was fighting for it, but ultimately, what mattered was whether or not the story moved in the direction. We could not force it beyond mere research and improvisation, or at least we shouldn't try. Not when we had a very clear objective in front of us. Riley, you gotta look at the tropes. What do you know about their first attack? Ant-Man asked. I thought back to the various rules and abilities that the werewolves in this story had, according to what I had seen on Logan when he transformed. The first attack is going to be an individual. They won't attack us all at once until Second Blood. To kill a werewolf, you have to make its death special, so a long-distance shot probably isn't going to do it. It's not personal or climactic enough. You'll probably have to put yourself in danger. The wolves could not die mundane deaths. Even if the lore said they were deathly allergic to silver, the meta said you could only kill them at the zenith of battle, whatever that meant. My interpretation was that they had to have a special death that had to be set up and executed. They've also got that annoying trap from Ranger Danger, I said. Everyone is a suspect. Great, Ant-Man said. I thought you had said that. I was hoping I misheard you. What trap are we referring to? Andrew asked. I couldn't see him from where I was sitting, so I just spoke aloud to the room. You guys played Ranger Danger, right? Yes, Andrew said. Delta Epsilon Delta was one of our first storylines. It seemed that was a pretty typical starter storyline around Camp Dyer. Do you remember the part, around the time the murder happened in that storyline, where everyone got separated, and no one saw where any of the suspects were? There was a moment of silence. And then Andrew said, "Oh, that. Yes, I was called away to help someone with an injury. I was a medical student in that storyline." Exactly, I said. In this story, it'll be even worse, though, because in this story, there's a chance that one of us actually will be the killer. I mean, if we turn into a werewolf. What are the implications of this? Andrew asked. I've been thinking about this, I said. The way I see it, tonight, and it will almost certainly be tonight because of where the plot cycle is, everyone in this room is either going to be a victim or a suspect. So don't fight against it. During First Blood, make sure that you're away from the others, hiding, running, whatever. But don't go too far because we need to regroup right after First Blood. After First Blood, anyone could die. Well, most likely, it would be me because of my low effective plot armor. But the point remained. After First Blood ended, Rebirth started, and while deaths were not guaranteed during Rebirth, they were possible. Except me, Lila said. I'll definitely be a victim. She didn't sound like she felt sorry for herself. She was just correcting me, and she was certainly right. Most of us had been in that situation before, knowing our death was to come. That was part of the game. Bad Luck Magnet made her the first target. Always. I'll be right after you, I said. Most likely. This is all a shame, Andrew said. I was hoping that some of us could hole up inside this room tonight. Perhaps we would get lucky, and Sanctuary would set up a bit early. I thought about that too, I said. But if everyone ends up being a suspect or a victim, that means if two of us ended up in here, one of us would end up dead. Or else we would get forced out somehow. You can stay here, though. If it's just you, you should be safe. Unless I'm the werewolf, Andrew said. I laughed. That's true, I said. Though if Kimberly's right, it sounds like the blonde mercenary might be the werewolf. That would be a little too easy. So, do we kill him? Michael said, the first real sentence he had spoken in a while. No, Ant-Man answered. He's gotta be our suspect. We're supposed to draw out the mystery aspect, so we can't acknowledge we know he's a werewolf on screen. That was the hard part. We could devise a way of detecting a werewolf in our midst, but if we did that, the mystery would be solved too soon, and what would we fill up the rest of the movie with? Carnage? We have to pretend to suspect each other then, Andrew said. That could be difficult. That was an acceptable plan, but personally, I wasn't sure how much Carousel would go along with our plan to cast suspicion in every direction, hoping to draw out the murder mystery aspect of the story. At first, I thought that's what we were going to do. The Atlas even suggested it. But the more I got a feel for the story, the more I began to question whether Carousel would go for such a subplot. Let's just be cautious about accusing each other, I said. Earlier, when we discussed things on screen, we decided that little pinprick of werewolf saliva wasn't enough to transform us this quickly. If that's the case, Carousel may not want our characters accusing each other at first. Why not? Ant-Man asked. I tried to find a way to phrase it delicately. It'll make us seem stupid, I said. The lore says it takes a while to transform unless you are gutted in a werewolf attack. Maybe once the full moon hits, we can accuse each other, but we can't be overly paranoid too quickly. So we play it by ear, Ant-Man said. We play it by ear, I agreed. The problem with that, of course, was that Carousel could play it by ear, too. Tobe continued. Thanks for listening.